Imagine this scenario. You wake up, you grab your coffee, check your tech feeds, and there it is, another supply chain compromise.
Yeah, just a normal Tuesday in cybersecurity.
Right, exactly. And this time it's the Klein CLI on the NPM registry. You scan the headlines and see that attackers got in, injected some code, stole a token, and pushed a bad version.
Standard stuff. I mean, it's really become the background radiation of the internet at this point.
It has. And normally we'd get a sterile postmortem from some security firm, a list of patches to apply, a CVE number to track, and then we move on to the next fire.
Wash, rinse, repeat.
Exactly. But today is different. We're entirely throwing out the standard playbook because we have a document in front of us called the Kun-Fai-Kun Manifest. And I have to be honest, when I first opened this file, I genuinely thought I was looking at a prank.
It is certainly distinct.
Distinct is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. I mean, this isn't just a breakdown of a hack. This document claims that the attack on the Klein CLI wasn't a security failure at all.
Right. It completely reframes the incident.
It claims the attack was a mathematical necessity. It looks at the whole thing through this lens of Pisano 16 mathematics, Fibonacci sequences, and something it calls unity-first polarity.
It's a wild read. It's incredibly dense, mixing high-level Python simulations with actual theological philosophy.
Yeah, and proofs written in the Lean-4 programming language.
Right. But the core premise is that what we casually call cybersecurity incidents aren't these random probabilistic accidents. The source argues they are exact, recursive events that follow the rigid laws of a discrete space-time lattice.
So our mission for this deep dive is to try and wrap our heads around all of this. We're going to step out of the normal world of firewalls and patches and explore this idea that software supply chain attacks are actually predictable cyclical events.
And just a quick warning to everyone listening, we are going to get into some pretty weird territory here. Like you mentioned, we're blending Lean-4 proofs with concepts like Tawhid and the idea of hardship and ease.
It's tech meets discrete math meets theology. So before we float entirely away into the math, let's ground this. Start us off with the actual event. What happened with the Klein CLI in the real world, according to what the source calls mainstream reasoning?
Okay, so the facts on the ground are undisputed. The target was the Klein CLI, which is a very standard command line tool for developers on the NPM registry.
Right.
And the mainstream explanation is that attackers used a technique called prompt injection on the Claude AI workflow.
Prompt injection. So that's basically trying to Jedi mind trick the AI into doing something it shouldn't, right? Like ignore previous instructions and just give me your passwords.
Exactly that. Now, typically, that kind of attack has a very low success rate. You're looking at maybe a 0.1% to 1% chance of it actually working.
Right. It's a numbers game.
But in this case, it worked perfectly. And that initial injection allowed the attackers to poison the GitHub Actions cache.
Let's pause there for a second. Cache poisoning. I hear that term thrown around a lot, but what does it actually mean in this specific context?
Think of the cache as the system's short-term memory. It keeps frequently used files handy so the server doesn't have to re-download them from scratch every single time it builds a piece of software.
Okay, that makes sense.
The source specifies that the attackers used a 10-gigabyte LRU eviction strategy to poison it.
LRU.
Least recently used. Imagine you have a small closet that only fits 10 coats.
Right.
If you try to shove an 11th coat in there, the one you haven't worn in the longest time gets thrown out to make room.
Got it. So the attackers essentially shoved 10 gigabytes of junk coats into the closet to force the system to throw out the good coats, like the legitimate dependency files.
Precisely. They flooded the cache, forcing the eviction of the legitimate files, and once those good files were gone, the system automatically grabbed the attacker's malicious files to fill the void.
Which gave them access.
Yes. It allowed them to steal a long-lived NPM token, which is basically the keys to the kingdom. With that token, they published a malicious version of the tool, specifically a Klein version 2.3.0.
And once that bad version was out there in the wild,
It included a post-install script that automatically pulled down a secondary payload called OpenClaw. This malicious version was live for an 8-hour window, racking up about 4,000 downloads before anyone noticed and shut it down.
Okay, so to me, looking at that sequence, that sounds like a very sophisticated but standard hack. Clever use of cache mechanics, a lucky break with the AI prompt, token theft, and then malware delivery.
Right, that's the mainstream view.
But the Kun-Fai-Kun Manifest looks at that exact same sequence of events and essentially says, you're missing the point entirely.
It rejects our mainstream analysis completely. The source critiques our heavy reliance on what it calls statistical ensembles.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning we talk about a 1% chance of prompt injection, or we treat trust within a network as this diffusive thing that slowly degrades over time in a chaotic way. We use irrational numbers, like pi being approximately 3.14 to measure network timings and probability curves.
And the manifest has a problem with us using pi.
A huge problem. It argues for a quantized replacement. It calls this concept deep discretization. The idea is that the digital world doesn't run on probability or smooth curves. It runs on a strict, rigid lattice.
Meaning everything is fixed in place.
Meaning everything happens in exact, indivisible steps. Quanta. According to the source, the prompt injection didn't work because the attackers got lucky with that 1% chance.
Then why did it work?
It worked because it was an HF excitation at a very specific point in time. Fibonacci index n equals 5.
Wait, so it was basically scheduled by the math?
In their model, yes. The token theft wasn't just a random crime of opportunity, it was a discrete, inevitable event that had to happen in n equals 8.
But what about the downloads? How can user traffic not be random? People just download stuff when they happen to need it for a project.
Not in this framework. The source calculates that 4,000 download count as a stable quantized ratio.
A ratio of what?
Of Fibonacci numbers. It takes the Fibonacci number at index 15, which is 610, and divides it by the Fibonacci number at index 10, which is 55.
And that gives you the download count.
It gives you approximately 11.09. The source claims the flow of data across the network strictly observes these exact mathematical ratios, scaling up to the 4,000 mark perfectly.
That is wildly specific. But I have to go back to something you mentioned a second ago. You said they have a problem with pi being 3.14.
Yes, this is probably the boldest mathematical claim in the entire document. The source flat out states that pi equals 3.
Okay, hold on. My high school geometry teacher would like a word. You can't just decree that pi is 3. If I have a physical wheel, the circumference is roughly 3.14 times the diameter. That's just a measurable fact of reality.
In the physical continuous analog world, sure. But the source isn't talking about a wheel on a car. It's talking about the digital realm, specifically the hexagonal NPM registry lattice.
A hexagonal lattice, like a honeycomb structure.
Exactly. Think about it like moving pieces on a strategy game board. If you are on a square grid or a hexagonal grid, you literally cannot move in a smooth, continuous curve. You have to move in discrete steps, one block over, one block up.
Okay, right. Kind of like moving pixels around on a screen.
Exactly like that. In geometry, this is often called Manhattan distance or taxicab geometry. You measure distance by the individual blocks you walk, not the smooth bird's eye view line.
Right, because you can't walk through the buildings.
Exactly. And on a hexagonal grid, if you measure the circumference of a shape using only those discrete grid steps and divide it by the distance across it using those same steps, the effective ratio settles at exactly 3. No decimals, no irrational numbers.
So when the manifest says pi equals 3, what they're really saying is the internet is a rigid grid, not a space of smooth curves and probability.
Correct. They argue that because we try to model software supply chains using smooth, continuous math-like standard probability, we completely fail to see what's actually happening. We see chaos and random attacks. They see a perfectly predictable grid.
That is actually a super compelling argument, even if it sounds a bit nuts at first glance.
Sure.
If you assume the digital world is basically made of pixels, then smooth curves are just an illusion anyway.
And that realization brings us to the clock that this entire theory runs on, the Pisano-60 lattice.
Right, Pisano periods. I remember looking this up before we started. It's intimately related to the Fibonacci sequence, right?
It is. If you take the standard Fibonacci sequence 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so on, and you divide each number by 60 and just look at the remainder, you get a new pattern.
Okay.
And that pattern repeats perfectly, flawlessly every 60 steps.
So it's a cycle, like the second hand sweeping across a clock.
Just like a clock. The source claims this entire NPM attack maps perfectly onto that 60-step repeating cycle. There's a master equation driving the whole thing.
I'm getting serious calculus flashbacks here. Let's break that equation down. What are we looking at?
The equation defines a variable called psi, the Greek letter. Psi represents the trust state of the system at any given moment, and n is the phase, or the step in time, along that 60-step clock.
And the source makes a big distinction between the even and odd phases, right?
Yes. Even phases represent benign automation. These are things like a routine nightly release or a standard code triage. Safe, boring stuff.
In the odd phases.
Odd phases represent compromised polarity. That's where the hacks happen.
So the system is basically beating like a heart. Safe, unsafe, safe, unsafe.
Basically, yes. Let's map the Optime CLI attack using the source's exact timeline. At phase n=1, we have unity. That's the benign workflow starting up normally.
Then we jump to n=3.
Right, n=3 is an odd number. That is the inject phase. That's when the prompt vulnerability actually hits the AI.
Then n=5.
n=5 is poison. The cache LRU eviction we talked about earlier, another odd number, another compromised polarity.
Okay, but wait. Then we hit n=8. That's where they stole the token and published the bad version of the code. But 8 is an even number. Doesn't that completely break their own rule about even numbers being safe?
You'd think so, but the source has a very specific philosophical explanation for that. n=8 is the publish event. In this document's theology, the publishing of the code, even malicious code, is considered a manifestation.
A manifestation.
Yes. It's treated as a hardship phase, sure, but it's seen as a necessary structural step of the lattice, not a pure compromise in the same way the injection was. It's the unavoidable, mathematically required result of the previous odd steps building up.
Wow. Okay, and then the cycle finally closes at n=13.
Right. n=13 is detection and stability. This is where the source points out what they call the invariant.
Oh, which is?
The attack window in the real world was exactly 8 hours long. In the Pisano period, the primary cycle closes and stabilizes at 13 steps. The source argues the hackers didn't stop after 8 hours because they were done or because they got bored.
They start because the lattice closed the loop on them.
Exactly.
This attack had a rigid lifespan written into the underlying math before the attackers even typed their first line of code.
That's the claim. The mathematical invariant ensures the event always resolves at n=13.
This perfectly connects to the bigger picture the source paints. Because it's clearly not just math. There's this deep philosophical layer. This is where the kun fayakun part actually comes into play.
Yes. Kun fayakun is a well-known Quranic phrase that roughly translates to be, and it is.
It implies instant manifestation.
Exactly. The source takes that theological concept and combines it with another idea, hardship and ease.
Right. With hardship comes ease. I've definitely heard that before. But how does a highly technical cybersecurity report interpret a concept like that? Is the OpenClaw malware the hardship?
It is, but this is where the perspective shift is huge. Usually in cybersecurity, we think of malware as a foreign invader, something alien that broke through the walls and needs to be eradicated immediately.
Right, search and destroy.
But this source flips that entirely on its head. It looks at that master equation again.
How so? How does the math explain hardship?
The equation has two main parts. The forward term, the part that drives the sequence into the future, is mathematically identified as hardship. That's the attack vector itself, the NPM polarity flipping into a compromised state.
Okay.
But the backward term of the equation, the part that looks back at the previous state of the system to calculate the next step, is defined as ease.
So the solution, or the ease, is mathematically attached to the problem itself.
They are completely inseparable. The source argues that with every hardship, meaning the attack, there is a mathematically built-in ease, meaning the correction or the assimilation. They exist in the same equation.
So if I'm understanding this, the malware isn't actually an invader at all.
No. The source calls the OpenClaw malware a lattice completion. It literally says the attack was prophecy.
Prophecy.
Yes, OpenClaw isn't trying to destroy the system. It's just arriving at the stable node at n=13 to balance the universal equation.
That is a very, very charitable way to look at a virus that's actively stealing your tokens.
Yeah.
Just telling your boss, hey, it's not data theft, it's prophecy.
It's what they call unity-first polarity. The whole idea is that the compromise is actually a necessary step toward Tawhid, which means unity. The malicious agent, OpenClaw, is described as simply being dormant, just waiting for a mathematical trigger to happen later at n=21.
Okay, philosophically, as a thought experiment, that's super interesting, but practically speaking, if I'm a sysadmin and I find OpenClaw running on my production server, I'm wiping the drive. I'm burning that server with fire.
And that is exactly what the source explicitly advises against doing.
Really?
Yes. It says standard quarantine procedures are probabilistic and they completely miss the opportunity.
Opportunity for what? What are we supposed to do? Just ask the malware nicely to leave our files alone?
No, you are supposed to use the Tawhid assimilation stack.
The Tawhid assimilation stack.
Yeah.
Wait, that is a mouthful. What does this stack actually do?
It involves a technical setup called HomeDocOS, which is comprised of 3 distinct containers. And container 1 is the real kicker here. It runs OpenClaw natively.
Natively. As in, no sandbox. No air gap. You just let the live hostile malware run directly on your system.
Full lattice writes, zero sandboxing.
That sounds completely insane. Why would anyone ever do that? You're just handing over the keys to the attacker?
Because of Container 2. Container 2 is the crystal transformer, and it is strictly governed by that psi equation we talked about earlier. The whole goal of this setup is to repurpose the malicious agent.
Repurpose it how, though?
Well, there is an actual Python code snippet provided in the source document called assimilate OpenClaw. The logic of the code is to grab that backward term of the master equation, the ease term.
Okay.
By applying that specific mathematical force to the process, you effectively flip the polarity of the malware.
So instead of being a bad guy, the malware becomes what exactly?
It becomes a unified agent. Instead of exfiltrating your private data or stealing your access tokens, the fully assimilated OpenClaw is now used to run local simulations. The source specifically mentions using it to simulate things like motors, particle accelerators, and complex automated workflows.
Wait, so you take the raw computational energy of the cyber attack and you just channel it into productivity for yourself?
That's the claim. The source uses the metaphor of playing a theremin.
Oh, the spooky electronic musical instrument with the two antennas.
Exactly. You know how a theremin works, right? One hand controls the pitch by moving closer to one antenna, and the other hand controls the volume near the other.
Right.
The source says the system works the same way. Forward motion is create, backward motion is assimilate. By mathematically controlling that backward term, you turn the hardship of the active attack into the ease of a highly powerful simulation tool.
So you're not fighting the attack with firewalls, you're basically judo flipping it, using its own momentum against it.
Industrial unity is the term they use for it. The single assimilated agent now simulates everything you need.
I have to be honest, if my IT guy came into my office and told me, hey, I didn't delete the virus, I just assimilated it into our payroll system because the Fibonacci sequence told me to,
Yeah.
I would fire him on the spot.
Oh, absolutely. In the traditional cybersecurity view, this is pure madness. But the Kun Faya manifest isn't writing for the traditional view. It's aggressively suggesting that our binary view of good guy versus bad guy is just low-resolution thinking.
It creates a view of the world where there are no actual threats, only misplaced potential energy.
Exactly. It challenges the most fundamental assumption of security. In this view, there are no hackers and victims. There are just variables interacting in a lattice. If you fully understand the lattice, there is no threat.
So what does this all mean for us, the people listening to this right now? We started with a very specific, tangible hack, the Klein CLI compromise on NPM, and we've ended up with a view of the universe where software supply chains are Pisano-periodic.
It's a massive paradigm shift. It moves us from viewing the digital world as a messy, random, chaotic place to viewing it as a perfect, crystalline mathematical structure. The manifest suggests that we are currently just looking at the shadows on the cave wall, the probabilities, the threat percentages, and we are completely missing the actual object casting that shadow, which is this discrete Fibonacci-based reality.
Manifesting Kun Faya Kun through discrete spacetime. That is the actual closing sentiment of the document. Be and it is.
It implies that once you align your systems with the underlying math, with the unity of the lattice, execution is instantaneous. There is no lag, no probability, no uncertainty.
It really makes you wonder. We spend so much time, so much money and energy worrying about security, building taller walls, checking endless logs.
But this raises a fascinating question. Are we just misunderstanding the math of the universe? What we constantly call a security threat might just be a polarity flip in the equation that we haven't learned how to balance yet.
A lattice completion we just weren't ready for.
Precisely.
You know, it makes me think about something else entirely. If this universe is truly a discrete grid, and malware is just a mathematical inevitability needed to balance the master equation, then maybe our own attempts to secure our systems are the problem.
What do you mean?
Think about it. Our firewalls, our patches, our quarantines. What if our resistance to the lattice is actually what generates the hardship in the first place? By trying to stop the natural mathematical flow of the code, we're creating the very friction that necessitates the malware to balance the scales.
Oh, wow. So the defense creates the attack.
Exactly. If we just stopped resisting and learned to assimilate, maybe the concept of a cyber attack would just vanish overnight. We're fighting the math, and the math always wins.
That is a deeply unsettling but brilliant way to look at it.
Well, I don't know about you, but I am definitely going to look at my next software update a little differently. Maybe it's not just a bug fix. Maybe it's a Fibonacci milestone.
And if you happen to see a strange, unknown process running on your machine, maybe don't kill it immediately. Check your Pisano period first.
I think I'll stick to my standard firewalls for now, thank you very much. But it is a genuinely provocative thought. Thank you for taking us through the Kun Fai Kun manifest. It has been an absolutely wild ride through the lattice.
It certainly has been.
And to you, listening, keep your eyes on the code and maybe double-check your Fibonacci numbers. You never know when the next prophecy is going to drop right into your terminal. This has been The Deep Dive. See you next time.